This is planet Earth, a place we've called home for over 200,000 years. And for much of that history, we've lived harmoniously. But over the last 200 years, our relationship with Earth has become much more heated. Through industrial revolutions, world wars, mass manufacturing, and population surges, we've entered into a vicious cycle of overconsumption that threatens our survival and our way of life.
The moment of crisis has come. This is an urgent problem that has to be solved.
Now, we're at the tipping point between sustainable life and population collapse. And the Earth, our home, our world, is crying for help. This lush green landscape is Canada's Boreal Forest. It's considered to be the largest intact forest on Earth, with around 3 million square kilometers of greenery undisturbed by roads, cities, and industrial development. The global Boreal Forest extends across Europe, Asia, and North America, and is the largest vegetation zone on Earth, making up around 29% of the total global forested area. The area that stretches across Canada is integral to the local communities and the world. Home to thousands of species of flora and fauna, the boreal region is essential to regulate our climate, acting as one of the largest areas of carbon capture, which cleans and filters our air and water. Without the boreal forest, life in Canada and around the world would be very different. So when it burns, it threatens all our livelihoods. Wildfire seasons are nothing new. Forests in Canada are adapted to burn. It's part of their natural life cycle of renewal, helping to clear undergrowth and germinate seeds. Much of the wildlife and vegetation in this environment rely on wildfires. In fact, our whole planet is adapted to burn. The naturally flammable rock we live on has all the ingredients needed for fires, owing to its cover of carbon-rich vegetation, dry climates, atmospheric oxygen, and widespread lightning and volcanic ignitions. So whilst we shouldn't be surprised that wildfires occur, we have to be alarmed by their growing frequency and increasing devastation. For hundreds of years, we've been able to control wildfires. Today, in many cases, it's impossible. Our forests are more flammable than ever. Drier weather and a warmer atmosphere have turned trees into tinder and forests into matchboxes, ready and primed to burn. coming off the back of one of its driest rainy seasons, with only 40 to 60% of normal precipitation falling across the country. Canada's Boreal Forest region has experienced one of its most catastrophic wildfire seasons since records began.
When I was younger, we used to go out forest fire fighting, Dave. And so I know what fires can do and what they're like. And you know, this one was a monster.
Wildfires need two factors. They need fuel, they need something that will burn and something that will burn easily, and they need a spark. They need a cause. The increasing temperatures in the atmosphere and the droughts that are occurring around the world mean that many, many forests now are extremely dry. They're very dry on the ground. All the branches and stuff that have fallen off the trees in the past, they're all lying there as brushwood. They are extremely dry and they burn very, very easily. And then obviously the trees themselves are also very dry. So you've got a huge amount of fuel.
In Western Canada, the province of British Columbia grappled with one of its worst wildfire seasons ever, after a period of intense hot weather, drought and lightning strikes. Home to nearly 150 million acres of forest, thousands of species of animals, and some of the most populated cities in Canada, a burning British Columbia spells disaster for the livelihoods of millions. During 2023, hundreds of fires broke out across the province, burning nearly 4 million acres of land, forcing thousands of people to evacuate and putting the lives of servicemen and women at risk. Firefighters from across the world were drafted in to try and help stop the fires from spreading. But as more fires began to start, the task at hand became increasingly deadly and dangerous. In Revelstoke, a city 500 kilometers northeast of Vancouver, a small fire in the surrounding forest was growing. When it's not covered in snow and being utilized as a mountain resort, Revelstoke, situated on the banks of the Columbia River, is surrounded by green forest and vegetation. During the summer months, the city is a hotspot for potential wildfire outbreaks. Across the province, the British Columbia Wildfire Service are on hand to assist whenever a fire breaks out. A team near Revelstoke were drafted in to help stop the spread of the fire, now heading towards the city. 19-year-old Devin Gale, local to the British Columbia area, was part of that team. Alongside her brother and sister, she'd been helping to support communities and stop the spread of wildfires for 3 years. When Devin and the team arrived in Revelstoke, they discovered an abundance of brushwood, small bits of tree-like branches and twigs that sit on the forest floor. And in dry conditions, it's the ultimate fuel for wildfires, acting like kindling that helps the fire grow and spread across the land. When this fuel source is removed from the environment, firefighters have more chances to contain a fire or stop it in its tracks. The team set out to clear the forest floor, removing the brushwood before the fire could reach it. High winds and dry temperatures quickly turned the small fire into one that was becoming out of control. The chance to contain the fire became less and less likely. Devin, who was working in a remote area of the forest, lost contact with the rest of her colleagues as smoke engulfed the team. Devin was found trapped under a fallen tree and he was taken to a nearby hospital. Tragically, Devin died later that day, succumbing to her injuries in hospital, becoming the first victim of Canada's 2023 wildfires.
I'm grateful to have spent one last day firefighting with you. I'm grateful to have been close to you when the tree fell. I'm grateful to have been one of the people who pulled you out from under it because it meant I got a few extra minutes with you. Wherever you are, Dev, I hope you can feel the love. I hope you can see all of the hearts you've touched.
In the weeks that followed, 2 more fire officers died on duty as fires swept through the Boreal Forest. For their families, the brutality and tragedy associated with climate change now stuck with them forever. By May 2023, over 25 million acres of forest were lost to wildfires across Canada. On May the 6th, the province of Alberta declared a provincial state of emergency, with over 100 fires burning in the province. More than half of Alberta's land area is covered in trees, meaning a greater risk of wildfires spreading into communities that live near forested land. A large proportion of those at risk are from Indigenous communities, who live much more rural lives than the majority of Canadians. The lives of Indigenous communities are centered around the utility of natural resources, and the destruction of the forests threatens important cultural activities like hunting, fishing, and gathering native plants. This year, the East Prairie Métis settlement in central Alberta was nearly wiped out by a fast-moving wildfire, which forced much of the community to move further north. This included Carol Johnston, who lost her home, forcing her to flee from her northern Alberta community.
It was just kind of like imploded. They couldn't do nothing except for get the heck out of here because it was just burning so hot and fast, eh? There went our home. There went everything we owned. So it's sad. But the upside is we're working on getting us new modular homes. And it's going to be put right there on top of our memories.
While she and her family escaped unharmed, her story is just one of thousands. Whilst decades of successful wildfire suppression have resulted in very few losses of life or property in Alberta due to wildfires. Frequent evacuation incidents are disrupting the livelihoods of many remote First Nation communities across Alberta. Only 5% of the population identifies as Indigenous, First Nation, Métis or Inuit, yet nearly half of all wildfire evacuations have been from those communities. The 250,000-strong community in Alberta are being disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change, and often don't have a seat at the table when decisions are made over fire planning. Much like across the Boreal Forest region, fires aren't uncommon on Indigenous lands. They have been part of their history for thousands of years. But they're now spreading over such vast areas that more people are experiencing them at the same time.
The great majority of wildfires are caused by human actions. Whether it's a car driving over a stone that causes a spark and that spark falls onto the brushwood and that goes up in flames, whether it's people having barbecues in national parks, which they do. There are examples of arson where people set fire to the forests on purpose. So that's overwhelmingly the main cause of these forest fires. And what causes them to spread enormously and to be very difficult to control is if at the same time you've got strong winds, because the strong winds will take more sparks from the fire and they will give the fire more oxygen that will enable it to spread very often extremely quickly. And there have been examples where people literally have been burnt alive trying to flee the fire, but the fire is moving towards them much faster than they can get away from it.
In Nova Scotia, Canada's second smallest province, firefighters battled the largest wildfire in the province's history. Much like the rest of Canada, the southeastern province of Nova Scotia had an abnormally dry spring, receiving just half the amount of rainfall it usually experiences in April. Lack of rain, coupled with high winds, low humidity, and searing temperatures, saw the fires move across the province at speed.
Wildfires are absolutely terrifying. We've seen pictures of the big wildfires in forested areas, but nevertheless, a lot of people living there with their homes, and they can move very fast when they're fanned by strong winds. So you can be watching a wildfire which you think is 5 or 6 miles away on the horizon, and then before you know it, it's threatening to burn your house down. And that's a very, very terrifying experience to be in.
Across the province, the bellowing smoke could be seen from space, and the ground was scarred and blackened as the fire moved through the forests. Trees that were hundreds of years old burnt to the ground in an instant. In the capital, Halifax, 16,000 residents were forced to evacuate when over 200 buildings were destroyed, including 150 residential homes.
Looks horrible in lots of places. Folks have lost everything, and we're doing our best.
Many of those who were evacuated returned to Halifax to find their houses no longer where they used to be, and had to begin the long process of rebuilding their lives. For a small community like Nova Scotia, the 2023 wildfire season will live with them for generations. But as fires continue to spread out of control in Nova Scotia and the rest of Canada, the dense white bellowing blanket of smoke it created was picked up by strong winds and was about to cross over the southern border into the United States.
We are under an air quality alert. Smoke from wildfires burning in Canada drifting across the tri-state area. It is making the skies hazy, making for potentially dangerous conditions, especially for people with respiratory issues.
Yeah, the air quality is the huge issue, and it's not just a today thing. You know, we've been talking about this for a little bit. We've been talking about these wildfires in Canada.
By June 2023, Canada's forests had been burning for 3 months. And as Canada burned, cities in North America were preparing to suffer the geographical consequences of being neighbors. The first city in the deadly path of the cloud, New York.
So much of the area in orange, which means it's unhealthy for sensitive groups. If you have a heart or lung condition, you want to avoid any type of strenuous activity outdoors. And then there's even some red zones in there, including parts of Queens and the Bronx and parts of southwestern Connecticut, even parts of the Mid-Hudson Valley up toward Dutchess County. It's unhealthy for everyone, and you really want to avoid extended time outdoors in those red zones.
This is a Flushing Main Street bound 7 express train. The next stop is Queensboro Plaza.
Even at the best of times, the traffic-laden, densely populated Big Apple isn't especially known for its healthy air quality. And as the cloud descended, a dark, murky haze slowly fell, leaving New York City resembling a post-apocalyptic world, tinted by a dangerous orange hue.
It obviously hit everybody by surprise to all of a sudden not only have the smoke from the wildfires come down, but kind of coagulate with the pollution that we have and make the air quality so unbearable.
At its peak, air quality across the city was more than 56 times over the World Health Organization's pollution limit, leaving New York with the worst air quality in the world. Scientists estimated that breathing the New York air at its worst point was equal to smoking 7 cigarettes a day. Thankfully, masks were handed out, and the most vulnerable, elderly residents or those with respiratory conditions, were kept indoors. Outdoor activities were limited, work for many was cancelled, and popular plays on Broadway had to close as the smoky air settled over the city. The impact of the Canadian wildfires on the day-to-day lives of New Yorkers was an abrupt reminder of the interconnected implications that climate change can and will have on everyone's life across the world.
So as with most natural disasters, climate change isn't necessarily causing them, but it is causing them to be more frequent and to be more severe, often causing more damage and impacting more people than they have done previously or they would have done without any anthropogenic climate change. And as we move forward and the climate heats up even further, we can expect to see these natural disasters increasing in how often we see them and how bad they are, even more than we are now.
If the air we breathe continues to become more polluted, the necessity to adapt and change our lifestyles will be the ultimate cost, as we learn to live in a world devastated by our past inaction. For some New Yorkers, though, it was just another day in their life, and not even a toxic smoke cloud would stop them from getting where they needed to go. And once New York slowly emerged from the smoky orange hue, it became apparent that they weren't the only city that had suffered the wrath of Canada's wildfires.
Early season wildfires in Canada are sending smoke and haze here our way to Western Washington.
So we have haze out there. We can see in Columbus, the sky kind of that milky white.
Hopefully you're able to be inside most of the day because the air quality in Detroit now among the worst in the world.
How are they getting so close to us and so dense here in West Michigan?
Right here in Milwaukee in southeast Wisconsin is being blanketed with thick, heavy smoke.
Our city camera never really got a clean shot of the Denver skyline today because that smoke was just too thick.
The smoke is back in a big way, which means the air is unhealthy through most of Minnesota and western Wisconsin right now.
Tonight, an air quality alert continues over northeast Ohio as wildfire smoke pollutes the air.
And the air quality alert in Massachusetts will remain in effect until midnight.
We're up today. Chicago measured the worst air quality of anywhere in the world. In some places tonight, you can still smell that smoke in the air.
As whole towns and cities were engulfed, people across America were reminded of the impending dangers of a warmer climate to their health, their homes, and their livelihoods. As fires and smoke continue to spread throughout North America, across the Atlantic Ocean, Europe's own battle with the climate was about to unfold as the anticyclone Cerberus approached, threatening the livelihoods of millions. The empty carcass of a town, once full of life, now a wasteland. Generations of memories burned to the ground. The full force of climate change felt overnight. Situated just off the coast of Turkey, Rhodes is known for its rich history, beach resorts, and fine weather. The island is one of Europe's most popular holiday resorts. And every year, millions of tourists visit, heavily outnumbering the 125,000 locals who call Rhodes home. This leaves its economy heavily dependent on the millions of tourists that visit each year. So for Rhodes, the impact of climate change could lead to a total collapse of both its environment and its economy. On July 12th, Rhodes and much of southern Europe were engulfed in a heat wave. As the heat rose to above 40 degrees Celsius, fires broke out across the island, many caused by arson. Dry vegetation across the island became the ultimate fuel for the fire, with winds stoking the flames to spread towards people in towns and villages. The wildfires prompted the island's largest evacuation operation ever, with over 20,000 people being evacuated from homes and hotels, escorted on ships to safer areas of the island. Over 260 firefighters, 49 fire trucks, and hundreds of volunteers tackled multiple fires across the island. Across the country, Air Force pilots in firefighting planes and helicopters were drafted in. Utilizing large aircraft with refillable water tanks enables fire crews to attack wildfires from all angles. When putting out fires, these aircraft have to fly extremely close to the ground to help extinguish the flames. If they're too high in the air, the water and chemicals released would evaporate too quickly. Whether you're skimming water from a lake or drifting over fires just above the tree line, you're flying at the mercy of Mother Nature. The risks were laid bare in Greece when a water bomber crashed whilst fighting one of the 50 blazes across the country. Seconds after dropping water over a wildfire, the low-flying aircraft clipped a tree with its wing before disappearing into a canyon, killing the 2 Air Force pilots on board. As Greece emerged from the infernos, the scale of destruction could finally be laid bare. What was once green, lush land now resembled a blackened, ash-covered wasteland. Towns and villages, now empty, lifeless shells, ravaged by fire. In Rome, residents and tourists experienced some of the hottest temperatures ever recorded. In the queue to see the famous Colosseum, thermometers hit 45 degrees Celsius, leaving sightseers to use whatever they could to get in the shade. The intense heat, due to an anticyclone, an area of extremely high pressure, lasted 2 weeks across the whole country. Meteorologists aptly named the anticyclone Cerberus, after the three-headed dog in Greek mythology who guards the gates to the underworld. With temperatures averaging over 40 degrees for 2 weeks, it was literally hell on earth for those in the city.
One of the things that is likely to happen as the Earth warms up is that increasing parts of the world will become effectively uninhabitable. Humans can't live in outside temperatures of more than about 45 or 50 degrees centigrade. And we saw that for the first time ever in Europe. Europe has never been as hot as that in all recorded history. And of course, that was a similar temperature to the one in British Columbia in Canada. So heat waves are going to kill a lot of people, and indeed are killing a lot of people. And with heat waves, of course, you get heat stress. You get enormous effects, especially on people who work out of doors. Especially on people in poor countries who work out of doors, people who have to work on construction sites, who have to work in agriculture. Obviously, they become much less able to do their work.
The country's health, labor, and citizens' protection ministries issued emergency warnings, calling on employers to ensure staff did not work outdoors between midday and 5 p.m., whilst advising older, more vulnerable people to remain hydrated and indoors. Hospitals across the country saw sharp rises in the number of people seeking emergency care for heat-related illnesses. Even the animals in Rome Zoo were given frozen treats to help them deal with the intense heat. Alongside Rome, 22 other cities across the country were placed on red alert, meaning that the heat is so intense it's considered a threat to the health of the entire population. And across much of southern Europe, it was the same story. Lack of rain, coupled with the Cerberus-induced heatwave, was causing wildfires to spread rapidly, turning green lands into ash, destroying family homes, and sending tourists back home. But as the European continent scorched, countries across Asia were about to experience a different type of climate change. When we hear the phrase climate change, it's easy to cast our minds to forest fires, heat waves, and melting ice caps. But that's only half the story. With a warmer climate comes even more extreme weather on the other side of the spectrum. And wetter weather can be just as deadly as drier weather. Each year from June until August, South Koreans brace themselves for a monsoon deluge. Within a few months, nearly all of the country's annual rainfall will arrive. With it comes the threat of landslides, overflowing dams, riverbanks bursting, and devastation to local communities.
Climate change has a number of really serious impacts, and they're all related to the fact that the atmosphere contains much more energy. Now, the first thing is when the atmosphere gets hotter, it absorbs much more water. So a lot more water comes out of the ocean into the atmosphere. It's been calculated that for every 1 degree rise in temperature, about 7% more water gets into the atmosphere, and that's about 900 billion tons of water.
And every year, it seems to be getting worse.
So we've had 1.2 degrees rise in temperature. That's over 1 trillion tons of extra water are sitting in the atmosphere. And as we know, this comes down. So one of the first impacts is flooding, and that's what we've seen. The floods have become more frequent, they've become more extreme, and we've seen things that, frankly, I never thought I would see in my lifetime.
In July 2023, South Korea felt the full effects of a new, more powerful monsoon. Rain that usually falls over 2 months arrived in quicker, more intense bursts, leaving residents with no time to prepare for what was to come. Roads flooded, drainage systems collapsed, houses were completely wiped out, and people were evacuated across the country. Near Chongyu, the banks of the Miho River broke, sending a stream of fast-moving water towards the town of Osong. In its path, an underpass into the town, full of vehicles stuck in traffic. At least 15 vehicles, including a bus, were trapped in the tunnel when floodwater began to pour in. Within 2 minutes, the underpass became inundated as the deluge swept through it too quickly for people to escape. As the tunnel filled, some passengers climbed the tunnel walls to find space to breathe, clinging on for dear life. Others, trapped in their cars, weren't so lucky. Rescuers worked night and day to drain a tunnel leading into the city. 13 people died in their vehicles. Across the rest of the country, widespread flooding and landslides led to the deaths of at least 40 people.
Flooding is, to an extent, a natural occurrence. Having a lot of rainfall that can overflow a river, for example, isn't necessarily a consequence of climate change. But as the climate changes more quickly and the atmosphere heats up, the more of these unusual flooding events we see, and they occur in places that previously may never have experienced flooding at all. In those instances where flooding isn't expected and it comes at a time where people aren't prepared for it and it causes huge amounts of damage to buildings and properties and land and people's well-being in their lives, I think that's when we need to start calling it a disaster.
South Korea is regularly hit by flooding during the summer monsoon period, but the country is typically well prepared and the death toll is usually relatively low. But with the increasing speed and intensity of the weather, officials and residents are being caught off guard more often. And 5,000 kilometers away in Pakistan, residents are still recovering from last year's deadly floods. The Indus River is one of the longest rivers in the world. Estimated to be over 3,000 kilometers long, the river rises from western Tibet and flows southwest through Pakistan. As one of the most important suppliers of water resources to the Punjab and Sindh plains, the Indus forms the backbone of agriculture and food production in Pakistan. The source of the river, the glaciers of the Tibetan Plateau, are melting at an alarming rate. Since 1970, a quarter of the ice from the Tibetan Plateau has been lost. By the end of the century, as temperatures continue to rise, it's predicted that 2/3 of the region's remaining glaciers will be gone. In the short term, increased meltwater will cause lakes and rivers to expand, whilst bringing floods and mudflows to agricultural areas of Pakistan. In the long run, the glaciers are vital lifelines of the Indus River, Once they vanish, water supplies in Pakistan will be in peril. Whether you look at the near future or the distant future, it's not good news for the people of Pakistan. And even today, they've begun to feel the effects of the changing environment. Following a severe heatwave in 2022, Pakistan went on to experience one of its heaviest monsoon seasons in history. The dry, impermeable earth, coupled with the increased rainfall and glacier meltwater, created a suitable environment for flooding. The combination of two opposite periods of extreme, record-breaking weather patterns would prove for some to be deadly. And when the Indus banks broke in August 2022, the country began to drown. (1,739 people died, including 647 children. Over 15% of Pakistan's rice crops were destroyed, and nearly 50% of its cotton crop was affected, with residents fearing severe food shortages. It's estimated that the floods affected 33 million people across Pakistan, destroyed nearly 1 million homes, and caused over $30 billion worth of damage. The worst impacts of climate change are often felt by those who are having the least impact on the problem. Pakistan contributes less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but is one of the most vulnerable countries to the deadly consequences of climate change. And with the threat of rising sea levels looming, much of South Pakistan may not even exist in the near future. If we continue on this path, countries like Pakistan will continue to feel the devastating and disproportional repercussions of global climate change, putting them on the cusp of economic and social collapse. And if we look across the developing world today, some countries are already at that point. As the monsoon continued in Asia, 4,000 kilometers away, East Africa was facing its 6th failed rainy season. Rainfall across the Somali Peninsula is concentrated in 2 rainy seasons, one from March to May, and the other from October to December. Since 2020, this rain hasn't come. In Somalia and eastern Ethiopia, this prolonged hot weather and immense lack of rain have left the area in its longest and most severe drought on record. For Ethiopians and Somalians, who rely on livestock, local agriculture, and already limited water sources, a prolonged drought threatens their own lives. Large-scale loss of food and income over the past 2 years has led to food insecurity for millions across the region. Most rural residents in these areas engage in subsistence agriculture. Subsistence agriculture means the farmers produce enough crops for themselves, their families, and their communities. They do not sell their produce on the national or international market. With over 70% of Somalians living below the international poverty line, any disruption to their usual day-to-day survival can have a dramatic impact on their lives. Today, at least 31.9 million people are in urgent need of life-saving assistance. More than 3 million people face emergency levels of food insecurity, which means they regularly go a day or more without eating and have sold their possessions to earn income for survival. The impact of climate change is creating a new phenomenon in global politics: environmental refugees. Those who have to flee their country, not through the threat of war or persecution, but because of the effects of climate change and global warming. Environmental refugees are not protected by international laws, and they face greater political risks than refugees who flee their homes due to conflict or political oppression. Unlike traditional refugees, climate refugees may be sent back to their devastated homeland or forced into a refugee camp. In Somalia, the drought has forced over 1.3 million people to abandon their farms and migrate to displacement sites. While Somalians dream of a rainy season, when rainfall does come to their lands, the dry, impermeable ground will make it ripe for flooding. And with that, even more danger, destruction, hunger, and loss will arrive for the people of Somalia and Ethiopia, who have already suffered so much at the hands of their changing environment. For a country that emits less than 0.03% of total global emissions, the devastation they endure, whatever the weather, just doesn't seem fair. Across the world, continents, countries, and communities are being impacted by the ever-growing effects of our changing climate. And if we continue on this path, we're taking our world in one direction. From being the only place we know harbors life in the universe, to one that will be uninhabitable for most living things. We are all responsible, in some way or another, for the changes we're seeing. It should be the one aspect of life that unites us all, so we can put aside our differences and save ourselves from the common enemy of climate change. But as we look at the glaciers melting, ice sheets breaking, forests burning, trees collapsing. Rain falling. Cities drowning. Children starving. And our society collapsing. We have to wonder, are we really doing enough?